Thomas Jefferson was one of the greatest men who ever lived. Thomas Jefferson, he is best known for being the grand architect or the lead writer on the Declaration of Independence. We're all created equally, and that we have certain inalienable rights that all of us are entitled to and endowed with. And when Jefferson penned the Declaration, he was writing this as a rebuke for freedom, for liberty. And there is a paradox and an obvious critique of Jefferson in that he was a plantation owner. He had many slaves. People have ambivalent feelings about Thomas Jefferson, and that's okay. But Jefferson also, he wrote the Northwest Ordinance. The Northwest Ordinance is what let a bunch of the territories in the Northwest become American land and come into the United States. And actually, he wrote in it that there would be no slavery there. He grappled with the question of slavery his whole life. Madison and Jefferson are behind this idea that the slave trade would end, and that would choke off the slave industry. They were wrong. Jefferson, Madison, they accomplished so much, making a nation that was one of the greatest in the history of the world that also promoted liberty. Jefferson is one of the great fighters, along with Madison, for religious liberty. This idea that you didn't have to be just an Anglican to be a person, to be a man, to vote, to do anything. You could be Jewish, Catholic, any group, and you could still partake in government. Jefferson helped draw up the ideas of what it meant to be an ambassador for the United States, as he was to France. He's the third president ever. There was a very famous case, Marbury v. Madison, that dealt with the contours of presidential power, executive power, judicial power, and legislative power, a balancing of powers. Adams basically appointed a bunch of judges. He had already lost office, he was about to exit, and he appointed a bunch of judges. Jefferson was rightfully angry. The case went to the Supreme Court. John Marshall was writing for the court at the time. He writes a piece that basically says some of the commissions that were sent off by Adams are going to be instilled. Tough luck, Jefferson. Jefferson could have destroyed the Supreme Court. He could have brought a lot more power to the executive, but he didn't. He listened, and he wrote, and he learned. He is a flawed human being, as we all are, but he helped set the pathway for basically the creation of the United States as a whole. I mean, he's one of the grand thinkers behind it. The destruction of statues that are symbolic of our founding, of our ideals, like Jefferson or even Washington, it ought to fill one with lamentation. There's a pang of sorrow that hits me when I see folks tear down these ones of Jefferson or Washington. Things that we hold dear. If you enjoy opening up your iPhone and reading the news or writing a blog, you enjoy having the right to a trial by jury, you think these are rights that a good nation ought to have, that there shouldn't be torture or punishment, that you should have the right to counsel at a trial, you should have the right to not have soldiers quartered at your home to take over your home, that the police need a warrant to come to your home. If you believe in those rights, you owe a lot of those to Jefferson, to Washington, to Madison, to Adams, these brilliant people who were doing the best they could with what they had. It chagrins me to see statues of these titans be pulled down. We have so much good to learn from them. And of course, by today's standards, some of the things they did in their personal lives are abhorrent. But one ought not to judge people who are from the 18th century with 21st century goggles on. It's remarkable what they did at the time compared to the world at large. And candidly, even for 100 years into the future, what they did was far and away above what many other nations even came close to creating. There's something very special about that I think that we ought to give due deference to. It does make me melancholic to think today people only think of Jefferson as a slave holder, or Washington. Again, Washington could have been another king. He could have recrafted the United States. Jefferson could have destroyed the United States. That created the roadmap for freedom. Again, no one is saying that they're perfect. No one is saying that their writings are perfect, but we're not perfect. And it comes back to a certain extent to the Hobbes versus Locke ideal. Do you believe humans are naturally bad? We're amorphous? Do you believe that we're gray, shades of gray? Do you believe that we're benevolent? I don't know. But certainly figures like Jefferson and Washington at best are gray. They created the foundation for the United States, for a nation that promotes great quality, freedom, and something that we all ought to be very thankful for.